We're live from Las Vegas at the Circa Sportsbook Radio Row for their ultimate kickoff weekend for the Circa Survivor contest and the Circa Millions here on the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Jeff Erickson here with Jim Coventry, who, of course, are brought to you by the good folks from Circa Sports. Eager to talk about the Circa Survivor contest, the Circa Millions contest, talking quarterbacks today. Jim Coventry, we got a lot to talk about. Let's jump right into it. What is your basic draft strategy when it comes to single quarterback leagues?
So look, in terms of getting a quarterback, I'm about opportunity cost, and I really do not want to take the top 5 quarterbacks because there are just too many good wide receivers and running backs that I want to get. And I know there are teams that can be successful in fantasy that go with that elite quarterback. But when I see those wide receivers and running backs drying up, it is not worth it. So I am going to wait until the top 6 are off the board, and then I'm going to begin to shop, try not to miss the run. If I can get a Kyler Murray or a Joe Burrow, who we'll talk about later, I'll definitely be good with that. And if that doesn't work out, look, I'll wait super late at that point and maybe just go with a Caleb Williams, Kirk Cousins type of grouping and go with that. But that's how I'll plan my single quarterback league quarterback approach.
Yeah, I'm very similar in that respect. I don't have any Allens or Mahomes, any Allen, any Mahomes, any Hurts, except for the Scott Fishbowl, but that's a super flex league. We're going to talk about that in a second. I don't have any Lamar. I don't have any. I think I might have one Stroud, but I think he wasn't the top 5 or 6. I think he actually was like 7 or 8 in that one there. Yeah, so we take similar approaches. How about in a super flex? Often there's a rush to get those top 2 pretty quickly. Some people still like to go ahead and wait. What is your approach there?
So look, it's positional scarcity when you're dealing super flex. You're going to have 12-team league. You need 24 quarterbacks to start for teams, and then there are only 8 spots left at quarterback for 12 teams. So getting 3 quarterbacks is not something that's going to happen. So positional scarcity means I am taking a quarterback as long as I get one of the top 10 with my first pick. Now, if I'm at the very end of the first round, and if it's going crazy, which usually it doesn't, there's McCaffrey in there, a CD Lamb thrown there, and I'll get one of those top 10. But if it works out where I'm in the latter part of the first round and I can get 2 of my top 12 quarterbacks, I will get 2 early. Otherwise, I'm going to take the one early and I'm going to play the board and get myself a mid-tier second quarterback because I'm not going to miss out on a good receiver or running back over like a Kirk Cousins or a Matthew Stafford. I'll wait for those players.
Yeah, I like that approach a lot. I don't mind going 2 out of the first 3 rounds. I did that in the super flex league, the one that Jake Seeley runs. Awesome contest. Does a live one. I did the online version of that, but I had the 8th pick. I think it was the 7th or 8th pick, and I went Stroud in 1 and Caleb Williams in 3. Other people did press it a little bit earlier. Other people waited to the second one. Like Fred Zinke, our friend and colleague, he does the baseball podcast with me. He exclusively does super flex leagues, and in that league, he waited to the 3rd round to take his first QB and, took advantage. And the thing is, you press your advantage. If you want to be strong in quarterback, you be strong in quarterback there. If you want to wait, then you make sure you get those 2 running backs. You get an elite wide receiver and an elite running back. There's different approaches for that, even with Superflex. The one other variation I want to bring up to you, Jim, is what if it's 6 points for a passing touchdown? Does that change your approach at all for the position?
Well, the only thing it does is it changes how I order my quarterbacks. Joe Burrow and Dak Prescott will move up in that scenario as they are quarterbacks that are usually 8th to 10th quarterbacks taken, but at 6 points for passing touchdown, they're likely to be higher in that category. Also, I actually will take Patrick Mahomes, and I may consider moving him past one of the top 2 of Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen because I do believe this year with the speed they added to their receiving core, there's going to be a higher average depth of pass for Mahomes. It was 7 last year, career low by over a full yard. I do believe we can see that Patrick Mahomes with well over 40 touchdowns this year. So I think he's the exception early that gets moved up.
All right, and that's a good bridge to our first tier of quarterbacks, or that top tier of quarterbacks, one that Mahomes is always a part of. You look at Mahomes, he did have a bad year last year by his fantasy standards. The only top quarterback that really lived up to it was Josh Allen, maybe even Jalen Hurts because the rushing touchdowns, but the end of the season was pretty dicey, pretty rough for him. But you got the rushing touchdowns still. Let's dig into this top tier. Give me some notes here.
So when we start out, Josh Allen, I had him at number one in my quarterback rankings like everybody else until about 2 weeks ago. And there's one strength of schedule person I trust, and it's Warren Sharp. And Warren Sharp is usually spot on. Well, he pointed out that Josh Allen, from a quarterback standpoint, has a horrible schedule. Jalen Hurts has a beautiful schedule. And the problem I see for Josh Allen is that with Stephon Diggs gone, no matter what he looked like last year, he required attention from defense that was beyond what a typical receiver would see. This year, there are no receivers on the team that'll scare a defense. So between the tough schedule, and I believe defenses are going to be much more aggressive at attacking Allen, maybe even spying him, I moved him to 2. Jalen Hurts has all these weapons around him, a great line, a new coach in Kellen Moore. So I do believe Jalen Hurts ekes out Allen. But again, Mahomes can get into that tier because it could be a special season. I don't like the injury to Marquise Brown, but I don't think he misses more than 3 regular season weeks at most, if not less. And I do think this could be a special season for Mahomes.
Yeah, I've been pushing Xavier Worthy up my rankings as of late. The fact that Rashee Rice's judgment is going to come later. He might not even get any sort of discipline this year at all. We'll see what happens, but yeah, that does make it a rising tide lifts all boats there for that Kansas City offense should be better protected there. So I do like that quite a bit.
With Xavier Worthy, I get your point. He's 165 pounds. We saw Tank Dell do well, but honestly, when a player that size plays well, it's an outlier. I think Worthy's role in the offense is going to be to occupy a safety. I think he might see 1 to 4 targets in games. I don't think there's a world where he's heavily targeted. I think his whole job, again, is to keep the safety from rolling down into the box and going after Kelsey. Kelsey's been ganged up on the last 2 years. I think the purpose of Worthy and Marquise Brown was to open the field for Rashee Rice, for Travis Kelce. And so I think that's where Mahomes is really going to make people pay. And if those safeties cheat, we know Mahomes buys time like nobody else, and he's always hunting downfield. And those are the times when Worthy will get his big plays. But I just don't know that you can make him a regular staple underneath at 165 pounds because the hits he's going to take from the size of the linebackers and the safeties, it could be a real problem. But again, I'm open to your thought of maybe he should be moving up draft boards.
I think he should because of the way he's being used so far. I mean, I think they're trying to find ways to get the ball in his hands outside of just your traditional patterns. I think we're seeing more running plays involved with him a little bit there. I think he's one of those guys that they realize he's a weapon. I like the way some of the reps we've seen in camp and in practices as well. So I think it's going to be a little bit more than that. I'm thinking it's more only like 6 to 8 touches per game. And if that's the case, then I think he's a wide receiver 3 for us. And that's why I like him there. But this is a quarterback podcast, so I'll steer it back to here. So we talked a little bit about Allen. We talked a little bit about Mahomes. Let's talk a little Jalen Hurts. When we last saw Jalen Hurts, he was getting chased around. He was having a miserable day in a playoff game against the Tampa Bay Bucks, and the regular season was really rough for him as well. They have a center that is retired in Jason Kelce. And that might be overblown a little bit. I sometimes think that sometimes the idea of Jason Kelce might have been better than performance of Jason Kelce. After all, he did was just retire. But it is a little bit new of an offensive line. They just traded for Jahan Dotson today, adding another weapon. It may take a while for him to get acclimated to this offense, but they are trying to add to the wide receiver room for Hurts a little bit there. Are you concerned at all about the downslide in the last 6 weeks of the regular season plus the playoff game?
Look, Jalen Hurts was playing with an injured knee last year. He played through it, and obviously you're a mobile quarterback. He only rushed for 605 yards and 15 touchdowns on a bad knee. That's pretty crazy. Now, in the past 2 years, it was 760, 784, so there was a dip in rushing production. I think that when bringing in Saquon Barkley as well, though, defenses have to really be careful on how they approach. You have to worry about A.J. Brown. You got to worry about Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert. Hurts may have even more room to run, and the line's not a concern because it's a mobile quarterback. We've seen mobile quarterbacks with poor lines do well, but the rest of that line, obviously with Kelsey gone, the line is still very, very good. So I think Hurts in a great spot, and I do like the fact that Kellen Moore likes to start with a downfield passing game to open up concepts underneath. It's going to be really tough for defense to deal with Hurts this year.
Let's talk about the pros and cons of shopping in this year. You've already said, and we've already both kind of stipulated that we don't like shopping this early. What's the, there are respected people in the industry that do like getting that elite quarterback there. sometimes we look too much towards last year. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, there was a clear advantage to having a top tier quarterback. What is that advantage this year?
Yes, your hope or expectation when you're drafting Allen Hurts or Mahomes is that they are distanced from the rest of the field, that the quarterback 4, 5, and 6 are a good number of points per week, even 2 to 3 fantasy points per week behind those top 3 quarterbacks. So if you're believing that is the case, that's why you're shopping in that tier, because you want that positional advantage of points. But if these 3 quarterbacks end up being close to Lamar Jackson, to Kyler Murray, to Anthony Richardson, then all of a sudden that early draft pick, it ends up costing you because you didn't get that hammer on the field.
Yeah, absolutely there. That's always the fear. And, every year there's usually at least one quarterback that emerges that joins that top tier, whether it's Stroud last year, whether, Lamar in his breakout year, even Patrick Mahomes in his breakout year. I mean, there's always one, there's been that guy. It's been in the last 7 or 8 years, there's probably been 2 years where there hasn't been that guy. So that's one thing to look at there. We're going to hit that next tier of quarterbacks. But first, quick note from our host, Circus Fantasy Sports. The biggest pro football contests in Vegas are back. Circa Survivor and Circa Million are now up to $16 million in guaranteed prizes. 2 ways to win and no rake. Circa Survivor contests, and the contestants select one team each week with no point spread. Last the longest to win it all with $10 million guaranteed. In Circa Million, you can make 5 picks against the spread each week for your share of $6 million guaranteed. Quarterly and full season payouts. Enter in Nevada. Play from anywhere. Visit circusports.com for details. All right, Jim. We went through the top tier. Let's look at the next tier. Using the NFFC ADP, let's take a look real quick at those guys. They are Lamar Jackson, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson. I think Burrow's the next tier down, so we'll hold off on him.
So when we're talking about these quarterbacks, Lamar Jackson's interesting because Lamar Jackson, we know, is always going to have a great rushing floor. And so what we're going to deal with is we know that last year Jackson was healthy. In the prior 2 years, he had missed 5 games in each year. In those years, he rushed for right about 765 yards. So that's like close to 1,000-yard pace. Last year, 821 yards on the ground. So even with Derrick Henry there, we know Jackson has incredible rushing ability that's going to shape fantasy leagues and really give Jackson a chance to compete with the top quarterbacks. But what I like about Jackson this year is we saw from week 12 on last year, as Todd Monken's offense was more integrated, Lamar Jackson's passing numbers began to go up very well, and the touchdowns went up, and that was without Mark Andrews. Now, Andrews is his best pass catcher. No disrespect to Zay Flowers intended, but Jackson will continue to emerge. They'll add more to the offense. Jackson could be the player that enters that top 3 without a problem. And then we mentioned Anthony Richardson in this tier. Well, Anthony Richardson is the ultimate boomer bust, right? The 2 full games he played, he had 26 and 29 fantasy points. Even the game he played 17 snaps, he had 18 fantasy points. But the rub is he was knocked out of 3 or 4 games. One, it was till the last drive. But it's very risky because in a small sample size, he didn't finish games. So he could break fantasy football with the numbers he had in the full games, but he's got to be on the field to do that.
Yeah, I've seen people push up Richardson, including in the Superflex league that I was telling you about. Our man Lawrence Jackson took Richardson 1.1 in that draft. So that caused some waves. Great guy, by the way, Lawrence is. And I get it. When you're sitting at 1.1, you're not getting him back in a Superflex. So if you use your 1 on your rankings, well, then I think you play your rankings, if you don't run, else you don't rank them there. So I get it there. I wouldn't do it myself, but I see the logic behind it there. You did a video on Stroud and kind of the dangers of drafting Stroud where he goes.
Yeah, CJ Stroud is interesting because last year we know he's a superstar. That is not a question. He is going to be one of the great players in this game. But for fantasy, he had 1 game with more than 2 touchdowns last year. That is not top tier fantasy play. He's not really been shown a threat as a runner. 167 yards on the ground last year. Running at the quarterback position means a lot. And the thing is, Bobby Slowick runs an offense that comes from the 49ers roots that also is used in Miami, and they frequently use heavy personnel. They either have an extra fullback on the field, which in Houston, it'll be Andrew Beck. But what that does is it forces defense to bring an extra body in the box, and it allows them to throw at a higher depth of target. And we know they bring in the new receiver Stephon Diggs to go with Nico Collins and Tank Dell, and everybody wants to think they're going to play 3 receiver sets. That would completely go against the tenets of the offensive philosophy. And if they do that, then defenses can put a shell over the top, and that's going to take away Stroud's ability for big plays. So I love the talent. He's a superstar, but I think there's a big case to say he's more like a 8th or 9th quarterback instead of the 5th or 6th.
And that's fair. And I've made the point, we're going to talk Jordan Love shortly, that if we're as enthused for all the enthusiasm we have for the Packers, and I still have it, and we have it for Love goes cheaper, the receivers go cheaper, everybody on the Packers goes cheaper, and I view them as very similar offenses. You know, Houston has that first place schedule now this year. They had a nice, gentle schedule last year.
Mm-hmm.
Things are going to be a little different in that respect. So all that around, I see the logic there a little bit. I have a little exposure to Stroud, and I probably won't pay the market rate anymore for that, just for the reasons that you cite. Let's move on to the next tier. In my mind, and you can, see, we can expand or contract as you wish, but Joe Burrow, Jordan Love, Kyler Murray, Dak Prescott. I think those are the next 4. I put them all in the same tier.
Yes. So when we talk about Kyler Murray, we have to remember last year he's coming off an ACL, and we want to call him injury prone at this point. His first 2 years, he was mostly on the field. His 3rd year, he had a shoulder injury, missed some time down the stretch. And then the last 2 seasons, we know he missed games. It was 9 last year, and it was 6 in 2020. That was the same injury. It was an ACL. I don't think we can say that's 2 injuries. It was the same injury. So maybe Murray's not as injury prone as we think. But what I liked last year was we know that Marquise Brown missed time when Murray came back. We know that Michael Wilson missed time. It was often Trey McBride was a de facto wide receiver 1, and yet Murray in 7 of 8 games put up between 19.5 and 26 fantasy points. Again, with nothing around him. This year, Marvin Harrison comes in. Wilson, and Michael Wilson, by the way, remember this. He had at least 56 yards in 5 of his first 8 games. That was with Clayton Tune and Joshua Dobbs. And in the last 2 games of the season, Wilson averaged 65 yards. He can play. So now Murray has Drew Petzing, who is a very good offensive coordinator. He has weapons around him. Murray can run. I think Murray could smash his ADP. And again, maybe there's an injury concern. And if that's your concern, don't draft him. But I think that you can't hold an ACL against him for the last 2 years. He's going to be back to normal this year.
I just drafted him on Wednesday at my home league. Now that's a super flex league, but I went Richardson and Murray. So it's also 1 point for every 30 passing yards. So again, that's where I'm going to prioritize the running quarterbacks. And it behooves you to know who the running quarterbacks are going in, and the extreme running quarterbacks at that. But yeah, I'm with you. The NFFC in the last 10 days, Kyler Murray is QB9, and he's going at like pick 91. So start of the 7th round. That's a pretty comfortable price for me. If I'm drafting around that spot, I'm pretty happy to kind of click on that. And that's when I'm ready to jump in on quarterbacks. So this is a tier I like. I like Burrow for the price. I like Love for the price. Dak, we'll talk about him in a second because it's a little bit different. Let's talk Burrow here, though, real quick. It's pulling teeth to get me to talk about Burrow. But what's your level of concern? Injuries every single year with him. This year we don't have an injury going through training camp, knock on all the wood, but the last 3 years, training camp has been marred by some sort of injury or coming back from injury.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to have a full preseason of health. That is a wonderful thing, not recovering from something or dealing with a calf. And look, Joe Burrow, we know what we're getting at him. We are going to get a very high floor. He can run. He's run for over 250 yards in a season. And I could see that when defenses have to play a high shell on them, there's space underneath that's open, and Joe Burrow is willing to take that. I think the injuries have been a little flukish, especially the calf. So I don't think there's a big risk of injury. All players could get hurt. I think we're taking the discount because realistically, last year when Burrow was out, we saw the offense use a little more play action, and I think they could marry some play action into the shotgun game that Burrow used. You can run play action out of shotgun, and Burrow could get a little better windows to throw out of with that. We already know that out of shotgun he's deadly, but I think they marry those new concepts, and this could be Burrow's best season yet.
So you're not concerned about the Ja'Marr Chase contract situation?
It's tough because we don't know what's going to happen with that.
Right.
Everybody seems to be getting paid. The Bengals have to realize they're in a Super Bowl window right now, and things are going to get impossible down the road. But I don't see a world where they can't lock him up. And what you say, deadline spur action. Well, week 1 is a deadline. I don't think that Burrow and Chase need time together. You do worry about soft tissue injuries when a receiver comes back after like sitting out camp time. That is a concern. But for right now, I'm just going to say, you know what? I expect Chase going to be there. I can't predict injury. So I'm going to say we have to roll. And the price you're getting Burrow, you are getting a discount.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think, we got one discount early when, and like if you were drafting like a sicko like you are and drafting in June and May and things like that, and he comes out in minicamp, says, I think I'll be ready for the regular season, but I'm also not, I can't put a percentage on my wrist right now. All of a sudden you saw Burrow going at pick 100 or greater, and you got a little bit of a dip there. That still is probably gone now, but at the same time, it's one of those where you're like, oh, okay, that's fine. It's a little squishy, but I think you're right about this. It's interesting though with Chase that it's 2 years before he's due, not one. Like you compare that versus he's a year behind Lamb. Jefferson is a benchmark, but Jefferson was in the league for a year sooner than Chase. So that's one of the things. I think the Bengals were caught off guard by this.
Yes, Chase is playing the market wisely. I'm sure his agent has a great feel for this and realizing the Bengals know they can't do without him. It really is a smart way to play this.
Yeah, I think so too. It's disturbing to me though, because I want things to be harmonious. Okay. Last night we had a conversation about Dak Prescott. And you said something to the effect, I don't want to touch him. Am I misquoting you on this one here, Jim?
Slightly. I was all in on Dak Prescott over a month ago. I was drafting plenty of shares of Dak Prescott because last year after Dallas's week 6 bye, they realized they couldn't run the ball. So what did they do? They went extremely pass heavy. Prescott scored at least 29 fantasy points in 7 of his last 12 games. That includes the NFL playoff game. And it's because they realized, and I give Mike McCarthy credit, they threw the ball and they moved CeeDee Lamb all over the formation. Well, now the fact that CeeDee Lamb, as of this recording, is not in camp and there's really no second option. I like Jake Ferguson, but this offense is going to be in big trouble if Lamb's not there. If the missed time causes Lamb to not be ready, maybe have a setback. Dak Prescott is too reliant on CeeDee Lamb, I believe, to have fantasy numbers. So right now, with no clarification, I'm going to take a less risky option.
Right. And Lamb and Chase, you have to kind of tie them together. Ayuk is a little different, I think, because no one's talking trade with Lamb or Chase, but they are with Ayuk. So, it's a separate issue, but, I haven't moved down Chase and Lamb, maybe more than a spot or two, which means we shouldn't be moving the quarterbacks down more than a spot or two. It should tie together, right?
I know. And like I said, it's Prescott. I have moved down. I did that. With Burrow, I almost think that, Burrow has Higgins. If Higgins has to be the number one, he's not Jamar Chase. But
no, but he's good. He's like a 1A or 1B sort of type of receiver.
Yes.
I agree.
And I think that Burrow, again, at ADP can get it done. Where Dak Prescott, as I said before, what do you have left? You've got an aging Brandon Cooks. You got to wish and hope that Jalen Tolbert is a third-year breakout guy. Love Ferguson, but again, he's a tight end, and he's not a Travis Kelce type tight end. So I just think at least there's Higgins for Burrow.
Yeah. Okay. Let's do quickly Jordan Love. I mean, there's been a lot of positive things said about Jordan Love. You got the contract, and yet he's, like we said, he's getting drafted much cheaper than CJ Stroud, for instance. There. What else do you have to say about Jordan Love?
The only concern I have is this. Joe Barry, the defensive coordinator, was fired. Last year, the defense was horrific, and Jordan Love attempted 579 passes. Think back to the Aaron Rodgers day when the defense was decent. Matt LaFleur would usually keep Rodgers to 520 to 530 attempts. That is what he wants to do. He wants a balanced offense. With Jeff Hafley coming in with the aggression he wants to bring in, there is talent on the Green Bay defense. It just wasn't used in the passive approach that Joe Barry had. So this defense is even somewhat near league average. Jordan Love is going to lose 50 to 60 pass attempts because if Aaron Rodgers wasn't throwing the ball that many times, they're certainly not letting Jordan Love do that. And so the concern is the volume's out there. But if he gets that volume and you're betting on that, then Jordan Love certainly has the weapons and the coaching and the ability to cash easily at that ADP.
I think that's also a good rejoinder to my statement that why are we drafting the Packers receivers so much lower than the Texans receivers? Not just that there's 4 versus 3, but also there might be less volume to share. I guess I could see that as well. We are also brought to you by Fantasy Sports Knockout, where a fantasy league meets a knockout pool, an innovative take on fantasy football. The concept is simple. Choose a new fantasy lineup each week and score points the same way you would in any fantasy league. But you must choose your players wisely. You can only use each player one time. The lower weekly score or group of scores is eliminated from the contest every week. The concept may be simple, but the survival is not. How will you play? Load up early or play the matchups or save the better players for later? Fantasy Sports Knockout. Can you survive the fantasy? Sign up at play.fantasysportsknockout.com today. All right. We are here at Radio Row at Circa. Jim Coventry and I'm Jeff Erickson. Thank you for joining us on this podcast. Let's move on to the next tier here, Jim. Let's talk about guys that are not necessarily starters sometimes. We're talking like Jayden Daniels. We're talking a little bit lower, Brock Purdy, Jayden Williams. Help us separate these guys.
Jayden Daniels is going to have the risk-reward level, not the high of Anthony Richardson, because we haven't seen him play yet, maybe not the potential low of missing all the time, but Jayden Daniels is going to be interesting. He's going in some drafts as the quarterback 10 because people know running quarterbacks have massive fantasy upside. I say this every year. When Tim Tebow was a starter, he was a fantasy QB1, and he couldn't really throw at an NFL level. So Jayden Daniels, here's the deal I want to make. He was listed at 210 pounds. If you see him, I don't know that he's 190. And in college, he never tried to avoid a hit. If he does that in the NFL, he will break. It will not work out for him. Offensive line is bad. And also, Jayden Daniels threw 40 touchdowns last year. It's beautiful. But he had been a starter in college since 2019, never threw more than 17 touchdown passes. Was he simply a man against boys last year with a great set of receivers and a great system who just had it work out for that reason? And these are things we have to worry about. But the running ability and potential is there. So if you're drafting him, I say draft the second quarterback because I really am worried he'll hold up. But at that size very much scares me.
Yeah, there's a YouTube compilation, all the hits he took, right? It's pretty wild. I still remember the week 0 hit he took against Florida State last year. I amazed it. He's not only did he bounce, he kind of bounced back up. He stayed in the game, but wow, that was ill advised. He went high, and I think he's a high runner. And I think we talk about that with running backs all the time. Sometimes we don't talk about it with the quarterbacks because let's face it, we don't view him as that. That's one of the things that makes Lamar so special, by the way. He never takes that direct hit.
Yes.
I think that's one of the things that's so amazing about him. Brock Purdy, another wild card guy this year, though, because we don't know who he's going to be throwing to. Is Brandon Ayuk going to be there for that matter?
It's funny as I'm going to say this. Brandon Ayuk makes the offense obviously better before I get to my point. Brandon Ayuk has an ability to stretch a defense like very few others, and he gets open instantaneously. But all that said, this offense has George Kittle. This offense has Deebo Samuel. It has Christian McCaffrey in the backfield, and it's the Avengers around Purdy. Yes, it won't be great if they lose Ayuk, but realistically, this system that Kyle Shanahan runs, it is going to have weapons. So Kittle gets more work, and Samuel gets more work if we don't have Ayuk. Purdy's a floor play because they'll run the ball a lot. Their defense should be good enough to keep some lower scoring games. I think Brock Purdy's a great floor play if you miss out on this fantasy starters. I don't think he's a week-to-week ceiling play. You're not going to have many big games from him, but he won't hurt you each week.
I agree with that. I mean, you got the keys to this awesome offense, and every once in a while, Purdy does scramble too. He's not a total statue back there. They're not going to call design runs for him either, but at the same time, it is really kind of interesting that we're this close to the start of the season. We don't know if we are going to have a major component of this, of their offense there with them. One player that would not be coming back to the Niners if he does get traded to the Commanders is Jahan Dotson, who is now an Eagle. We didn't really touch on that when we were talking Hurts or Daniels for that matter. So let's briefly hit that real quick here.
Yeah, my expectation is the Eagles are going to be a heavy 2 tight end offense, and they're going to have 2 receivers on the field. Dallas Goedert, the tight end, will be the third receiving weapon. So I just think they're bringing in Dotson. If A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith miss time, it would be an opportunity if Dotson learns the offense to get in and rotate in. Certainly they'll run some 3 receiver sets. I know they brought in Paris Campbell. He was already hurt, but he's healthy now. So I think there's going to be a competition for that number 3 role. And Dotson certainly has a draft pedigree, 16th pick in the draft when he came out from Penn State. And he did show in his rookie year some ability. But again, he's got to learn a system. He's coming in very late in camp. The offense has mostly been installed. So I don't know how much of a factor he would be until even week 6 or 7 if things did work out.
Yeah. And that's the thing. So like, I'm not worried about him hurting AJ Brown's value, for instance, there. I'm not worried about him hurting Devonta Smith, really. If you look at the Eagles depth chart, they didn't really have a good third receiver. So, and the thing is, Dotson might not even be that great anyhow. He was having a bad camp. There was talk about him even maybe getting cut, needing a fresh start, et cetera, et cetera. You know, that Oz was going to beat him out for that number 2 starting job. Or, you know, maybe it could be McCaffrey, Luke McCaffrey. We'll see who emerges with Washington. I think that's the interesting part, is who's going to benefit, who's going to get the extra targets. It can't just all be Terry McLaurin. There's got to be somebody else that gets some targets here and there.
You know, Luke McCaffrey was the 100th pick in the draft. He was a converted quarterback. He's had a couple years of wide receiver experience, so he's a little bit green in terms of development that an NFL team might want at their wide receiver. It might take him a little time to get up to speed, but I think McCaffrey, actually at his size, has the ability to play outside and in the slot. I think people are typecasting him as a slot, but I think it might take him some time to ramp up as well into a role. I think he's going to throw a lot of bodies out there at that number 2. De'Ami Brown is a bigger guy, but I think he really projects to be a slot option better, like a vertical stretch in the slot. And I don't know that he's had opportunities. They've had a lot of receivers get targets the last couple of years in Washington, and De'Ami Brown has never commanded any real level of targets. So I'm a little bit pessimistic on him.
Yeah, I view Brown as the deep shot only guy.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's the way I've kind of been seeing that too. So if I were to speculate, and sometimes the answer is none of the above, but yes, if I were to speculate, I'd probably take a late flyer on McCaffrey. I'd look at the tight ends a little closer, maybe. Ertz, by the way, is the starter, not Sinnott. But Sinnott might be a slot guy. So we'll see eventually. I think this is also one where if you roster Sinnott now, you're going to be disappointed and you'll cut him, and then you'll have to pick him up in week 10. I think that's probably the pathway there in redraft leagues, and it's different, obviously, in different formats there. Okay, Caleb Williams. Everybody saw the wow plays against Cincinnati in the second preseason game. Most people didn't see the first 3 drives where they did nothing, by the way, and I think that's kind of the dichotomy with Caleb Williams. I'm in on Caleb Williams, but I also understand it's a rookie quarterback. There's going to be growing pains. He's stepping into the best 1.1 situation ever. That doesn't mean it's the best situation in football. I think we sometimes have a way of conflating that.
I think Caleb Williams for fantasy is going to be fine. He doesn't have to be a great rookie quarterback to cash for fantasy. We've already seen his ability to run, and with the receivers the Bears have, defenses are going to have to respect that. DJ Moore is a proper alpha in the league and win at every level of the field. Keenan Allen's a great separator. Romo Dunze is going to be a factor. Even Cole Kmet, the tight end. So I think Caleb Williams will have room to operate, and I do believe the Bears are going to be able to utilize that talent to give Williams every opportunity to do his best. And we saw him like throw a tight window throw into DJ Moore a couple weeks ago in the preseason with 3 defenders around him. That speaks a lot, because that willingness to uncork it and let his receivers win, he has receivers who can win. I think Caleb Williams will be up and down for NFL, but for fantasy, I think he's going to be a solid contributor who you get right around that quarterback 12 to 13 mark, and I think he can be a fantasy starter this year.
Yeah, I think so too. Tua Tagovailoa, has made waves off the field this week. Talking about his former coach, Brian Flores, and all that. I don't really think that's going to be a story after 1 week into the season, if even by then. What's your take on him? Is he a fantasy starter for you?
So look, Tua Tagovailoa is getting drafted outside the top 12 quarterbacks, and for good reason. He's yet to throw 30 touchdowns in a season. From an NFL standpoint, he can't drive the ball to the outside, the perimeter of the field. He can't do that. When defenses take away the short area, he struggles to feather passes over to linebackers. We've seen him underthrow Tyreek Hill, and Tyreek Hill's been Superman, bailing him out. And so all that said, there's going to be a lot of up and down for fantasy. But overall, I still worry, and I hope this young man has a healthy, productive, long career. But I'm still saying he's one hit to the head from being off the field for a long time, and I know anybody get hit in the head, but his history scares the heck out of me. So for me, he's a complete stay away.
Complete stay away. Not even like a pair up with a weight on the quarterback. Okay, interesting. That's interesting. How about I'm gonna throw one more in this tier. Jared Goff at the Lions. We all talk about the Lions as this made offense, a really good offense, great offensive line. It's got Amon-Ra. It's got 2 amazing running backs. It's got a great tight end. Jared Goff's never a fantasy starter though. He's not a top 12 quarterback. I'm sure there are leagues where he's drafted, 11th or 12th quarterback drafted. And it's certainly, if you have Jayden Daniels, Jared Goff would be a great pairing. But But are we maybe underestimating his upside potential? He's pretty safe as a 4,000-yard guy, isn't he?
He's very safe. His numbers have been almost identical the last 3 years. He's always right around 30 touchdowns, and you really can't argue. It's like 29, and 30. And his yardage, other than 2021, he missed 3 games. He's a 4,500 yard guy. I think the reason people are sour on him, there have been clear home road splits. There's road Goff. That's a real thing. But the one thing that people bring up is Goff on the road outdoors is different than Goff on the road indoors. And I believe it's all but 3 games for Goff are going to be played indoors. So a lot of his road games are indoor. And if that's a factor, remember, Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator, he is perfect at designing plays to the middle of the field with Amon-Ra St. Brown, with Sam Laporta, hopefully this year Jameer Gibbs, and Jared Goff lives in the middle of the field. Could not be better, but I really think those indoor games that are heavy on the schedules here really make Goff an underlooked fantasy option.
Yeah, I think so too. I think he's ideal as a pairing with Daniels, and I think he's useful otherwise too. So I absolutely I agree with you on that one. I like that a lot. Before we talk about the Superflex / backup tier, got to share one more commercial note here with our friends from Fantrax. Is there something you wish your fantasy leagues had, or features that are missing from your current leagues? Bonus scoring, custom schedules or playoffs, deeper team settings? Well, look no further, because we have you covered with our friends at Fantrax. Fantrax is the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry, offering the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, and best ball leagues. Fantrax even offers college fantasy football leagues. Create or join Fantasy Football Commissioner League, invite your friends, and dominate your draft this season. Fantrax is the top fantasy dynasty football platform in the industry. Are you coming from another service? Not a problem. Fantrax can easily import any of your current leagues and rosters. Ever have a trade go wrong or make a mistake in dropping a player? Fantrax Commissioner tools allow you to undo any move with one simple click. Fantrax is running a special promotion you don't want to miss. Sign up for free at fantrax.com/RotoWire to enter for your chance to win tickets to any regular season NFL game for you and your entire league, plus $6,000 in spending cash. That's right, tickets for your entire league. Simply create a new league or bring your existing leagues over for more chances to win. Go to fantrax.com/RotoWire and sign up today. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. All right, Jim, we're on to the next tier, which is I like to call the Superflex tier, or the backup tier, the guys that we're drafting in later rounds to back up our riskier quarterbacks, or just to have a second one in deeper leagues. I don't always have a backup, but in certain leagues, the deeper the league we are, we're going to have some. So quickly, I'm going to give you a bunch of names, and we'll kind of do some like a hot note on each one of them here. Starting with I'm just going to go one at a time. We'll rapid fire these, actually, if that's okay by you.
Sure. So
all right.
You
go
mentioned,
ahead. You got a comment.
Yeah, you mentioned Trevor Lawrence, and let's get out of the way with him. The Trevor Lawrence is averaging over 300 rushing yards the last 3 years, and I think that goes overlooked. He hasn't been a great passer. Last year he wasn't. He had that great finish to 2022. I really believe this year Doug Peterson, the head coach, has to realize that the whole staff is getting fired if this offense does not perform this year. So I think that he gets more of a hand in the offense, and Trevor Lawrence, I do believe, is way better than his stats showed, and I believe he's going to shoulder a little bit more of the offense this year. I don't think he's going to be a superstar fantasy player, but I think as a super flex option, I think he's going to be better than his draft cost.
Yeah, and let's face it, we were drafting him as a fantasy starter last year. This year, it's we're getting him as a nice little cheap backup there, so that's awfully nice. All right, next quarterback on the list, that is Matthew Stafford.
Yeah, Matthew Stafford's interesting because this year, apparently, Cooper Kupp is healthy. The word was he was never healthy last year, and obviously Puka Nacua is there, and Demarcus Robinson became a thing. As soon as he was inserted in the lineup, week 11 or 12, he was a fantasy factor every single week. And we know the Rams run those tight formations and nearly impossible for defenses to stop, and their running game is great as well because they run that downhill game. Stafford is not going to put up eye-popping weekly numbers, but he's going to have a floor. Now, there's always an injury risk with Stafford. He's had back and neck injuries in the past few years. Last year, he stayed mostly healthy. But for that, again, as a fantasy backup, great option. You're getting him later, and he's a good floor play.
Yeah, he had the elbow also a couple of years ago, too. And then, that's the other thing to worry about. Had the hamstring in camp this year, too. Kirk Cousins coming back from a major knee injury, and a major Achilles injury, excuse me. Do you think he starts week 1? They've been kind of a little sneaky about that there, including not playing Michael Penix in the preseason. I don't understand that. Drafting Michael Penix in the first round for that matter too.
So with Kirk Cousins, he was on the scheduled release show on ESPN talking to Adam Schefter, and basically he said, unless something crazy happens, he is definitely starting week 1. He was at a point in March even where he was able to throw. It was just he couldn't run. But guess what? An Achilles injury saps explosiveness. Has Kirk Cousins been explosive in the last 6 years? No, he's a pocket passer. So to me, the injury is a non-issue. It might take a few weeks for Zach Robinson's new offense to really click with everybody. But remember, for Kirk Cousins, there's no learning curve. Kevin O'Connell ran the same type of offense that Zach Robinson is going to run, both from the Sean McVay tree. Cousins has already said offense is easy to pick up. It's just getting on the same page with his receivers. But that said, Kirk Cousins will be in a pass-heavy offense. There's Drake London. He has Kyle Pitts, and even Darnell Mooney, just for deep shots with that speed, works well. And then Bijan Robinson as a receiver out of the backfield. Cousins is going to be a very good fantasy option as a quarterback too, and I believe he could be a top 12 quarterback.
All right. I agree, by the way. I think he's my favorite weight on, like, pairing with, you mentioned Goff with pairing with Daniels. Cousins is an even better pairing, I think, too. Justin Herbert is the biggest dropper from one year to the next for many reasons. One, he doesn't have an alpha wide receiver this year. Two, the big one, he's got a new head coach, a new offensive coordinator. That's a run-heavy offensive coordinator. At least we presume that. And now 3, he's hurt with the plantar fascia injury.
Yeah, Justin Herbert was in 7-on-7s on August 20th, and he looked good. Apparently, his foot is going to be fine. It sounds like it was more precaution. On July 31st, he was diagnosed with the plantar fascia injury, but the fact he's back on the field within 3 weeks of that bodes very well. Now, to speak to people wondering about Jim Harbaugh, the head coach, Greg Roman, the offensive coordinator, and they're going to run. I get the idea, and I know that's what they want to do. Their defense stinks. It's been bottom 5 the last few years. It's a stars and scrubs defense. Joey Bosa has slid the last few years. Khalil Mack has his big games against Aiden O'Connell and the Raiders, but it's not a consistent defense, and there's a lot of bad players. They are going to be trailing most weeks. Justin Herbert is a superstar quarterback, and realistically, Jim Harbaugh's a smart man. You would have to think, A, he wants Herbert to throw the ball, but B, I don't think they're going to have the luxury of running as much as anybody thinks. I think as a second quarterback, he's a steal.
All right, Deshaun, I agree. Deshaun Watson, coming back from the shoulder, coming back from a bad year, 2 bad years, really. Where are you on him?
Yeah, Deshaun Watson as a quarterback, around quarterback 19 off the board, so he's going very late. The thing you got to think about Watson was, again, he hasn't played much football in the last few years, but when he's played in the last few years, his per-game rushing numbers are on about a pace of 400 yards. That is very good. That rushing is at the same level it was when he was in Houston. Obviously, the passing is not at that level. That said, Deshaun Watson in a Superflex league with the rushing ability is going to be very helpful. Remember his last 2 games last year, he had a very good game against Arizona. Now I know it's a bad defense, but then that Baltimore game, the game he got hurt, he engineered a big comeback against a great defense. It appeared to me like he was beginning to slightly turn a corner, and I do think his chemistry with Amari Cooper is real. They played 5 games together last year, and in 4 of those games, Cooper had at least 90 yards, despite only having one of those games with double-digit targets. So that said, I think Watson is not going to be a great quarterback, but for fantasy, he'll be a very functional quarterback too.
All right. We are on the Blue Wire Network. Here are their ads. All right. Thank you for indulgence on that little pause. And for those of you catching the podcast later, we're live from Radio Row here at Circa. I'm Jeff Erickson. He's Jim Coventry. We are talking quarterbacks. We're on to the lottery ticket tier. These are 21 through 34, 35. I'm just using the NFFC's ADP. I'm just going to name them, and then we're going to kind of go like rapid fire, really like one comment apiece here on these guys. Aaron Rodgers.
Superflex only. They're going to run the ball a lot. Their defense will be really good. I don't think he has the pass attempts to be a big-time contributor for fantasy.
All right. That was rapid fire. Well done. Justin Fields.
Lottery ticket. We know that if he can somehow get past Russell Wilson, we know Arthur Smith likes his quarterbacks to run, but as a passer, it's pretty grisly. But the rushing upside would be that he could be a starter for you if you needed him.
All right. Good job. How many games does Justin Fields play, by the way?
I'm going to say 8.
All right. Let's move on to the next one here. By the way, it's interesting that Fields goes ahead of Russell Wilson, the starter. I think that's interesting. Baker Mayfield no longer has his offensive coordinator.
Yeah, he has Mike Evans. Chris Godwin's moving back to the slot. This is going to be a Rams-style offense. Baker Mayfield has experience with Liam Cohen from a couple of years ago when he had that cup of coffee with the Rams. There's that. I am very worried that Mayfield is going to regress. Each time he's done well in the NFL, he's regressed. You're getting him so late, it doesn't really matter. It's low risk, but I am not expecting him to repeat last year's career year.
All right. Moving on to the next one here. Will Levis.
Will Levis had that great first game when he was bombs away, had the 3 long touchdowns with DeAndre Hopkins. After that, defenses realized, put a shell over the top. He struggled to throw short and intermediate. He's learning a new offense, bringing in new receivers. I don't know that he's even an NFL starting caliber quarterback long term. I think there's too many variables. But again, super late. He does run a bit. So as a deep quarterback too, fine.
I kind of like him. I like Callahan though too. This is my Bengals glasses watching this here. I think he's in. I like that they gave him more weapons to work there with bringing on Ridley aboard too. And I think that offensive line will be better than last year. Geno Smith.
Geno Smith has Ryan Grubb coming in to coach the offense. They got rid of Will Disley and Colby Parkinson, tight ends. That tells me they're going to run 3 receiver sets. But still, Shane Waldron got a career year out of Geno Smith 2 years ago. Last year, Smith kind of regressed down to 20 touchdowns. And I'm really worried that these college coaches, they can't make the in-game adjustments they're used to at college, just rolling it out, letting it go. I think that although Geno has a lot of talent around him, I think he's still Geno Smith. And I'm very worried about his ability to carry an offense with a new coach.
JJ McCarthy's out. Sam Darnold's going to be the quarterback all season long for the Vikings.
True. Yes, true. 2 good tackles. They're going to protect him. An offense that gets the ball out quickly. Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and what an escape hatch in Aaron Jones if he has to dump it. I think the weapons around him make it easy enough that he won't be asked to do much. And I think for fantasy, his receivers can get it done for him.
Bryce Young, terrible rookie year. A lot of dysfunction in the coaching staff and the front office and the owner's box. Is it better in year 2?
I thought he'd need to be an outlier to be good as an NFL quarterback. And last year, I don't think, even though the situation was stacked against him, I don't think he looked like an outlier. I think his receiving core still leaves a lot to be desired. They did bolster the interior line. I just don't think he's cut out for the NFL as a starter.
Bo Nix was named the starter for the Broncos, and he's looked good in the preseason. He has Sean Payton as a coach. That used to be a good thing. Is it still a good thing?
I don't know that they have the explosive playmakers that could catch those short passes and turn them into consistent big plays. I think this will be a dink and dunk offense. I think they're built to run. The offensive line last year, they had Mike McGlinchey and Ben Powers, both great run blockers. They brought in tight ends. This is going to be a run-based team, throw situationally. For fantasy, Bo Nix a game manager, and that's not what we want.
Derek Carr, captain checkdown.
You know what's funny? Derek Carr last year, it was like a super small sample size, but on play action passes only, he was the number 1 quarterback in the NFL. It was like 29 attempts, but we know
that's because they did it so infrequently. And they did no pre-snap motion also.
Right, but we learned in Derek Carr's even his past, though, if he is not under pressure, which is going to be a problem, the line's bad, he's very actually good. But with Clint Kubiak, the play action does get you that time. Last year, Chris Olave was used on mostly go routes, straight down the field. This offense would get him more open near the line of scrimmage. Derek Carr is going to be, again, a QB2, but I think you're drafting him as a QB3, and I think he could get as high as quarterback 22 or 23. Again, not great shakes, but if you need a third quarterback in a Superflex league, I do think there will be weeks where you can use him.
I'm going to title this podcast, Jim Coventry is drafting Derek Carr everywhere.
Ouch.
No, just kidding. Russell Wilson, any hope?
I don't think so. I think his ceiling is non-existent. His floor is low. And I think if he's in, it's going to be run with Arthur Smith. I just don't think he elevates the passing game in any tangible way. And I think Justin Fields is being drafted ahead of him because Fields potentially has upside where Wilson really has none. Wilson was bad last year. His numbers might have looked decent. He was just does not look like he can play at a level anymore that's going to elevate any offense.
2 years ago, Daniel Jones was a viable fantasy quarterback. Can that happen again now that he has Malik Neighbors?
I don't think so. I mean, I know it was a preseason game against Houston, but man, a couple ugly picks. He just looks like he's lost. He's coming off an ACL, and his running ability is what made him. I think that if he sees the coverage that Neighbors going to get, which will be bracket coverage probably, he's not going to try to force the ball into that window. And if he does, it's not going to end well. Actually, Wan'Dale Robinson might eat. But I think at the end of the day, Daniel Jones he may not even make it through the season because he is just not a good quarterback.
Looks like Jacoby Brissett's going to begin the year as the starter in New England, but Drake May's the guy that everybody wants to see. When does that happen? Is there a scenario there where you think you might pick him up?
I think Drake May's going to start a lot of games this year. I think the team's going to be in trouble. The offensive line is a wreck. Trent Brown, their right tackle, is no longer with the team. They're having
Uday.
Right? Yeah, they are having real issues on the line, and that line got better last year. This is not a good line. That's what you don't want for Drake May. And the receiving options are green. They're talking about Tyquan Thornton actually making a move, and we know what we saw from him the last 2 years. So I think it's a very bad situation, and I think people think the Patriots defense is going to be good. I think it was Belichick putting everybody in the right spots, and Matthew Judon's gone now. So I think this defense is going to put their offense in a hole, and defense are going to be able to load up against the pass, and I think it's going to get ugly for this offense.
All right. We covered them all, Jim. We did rapid fire that stuff there, so good job. Any other parting notes before we sign off today?
No, just again, when you're drafting quarterbacks, understand the opportunity cost if you're drafting those early quarterbacks. If you can live with that, if you think they're going to separate from the field, then go ahead and go after it. But otherwise, it's okay to wait. You're not losing that many points per game, but you're loading up on those running backs and receivers that tend to dry up on the board. You'll be set at all positions, in my opinion, if you go that route.
And that's going to wrap us up. Alan Seslowski's kicking us off out of the booth right now. We're actually already there, Alan. Back off, you bully. All right. This is good. Thanks for everybody who's tuning in to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast here live from Circa and Radio Row. I'm Jeff Erickson. He's Jim Coventry. If you like this podcast, please like, subscribe, and check out RotoWire, rotowire.com/pod. As always, please patronize our sponsors, especially our good host here at Circa. We're having a blast here. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Take care.